Good morning and hello, everyone. I'm Evelyn Diaz, president of Heartland Alliance. On behalf of Heartland Alliance and our incredible host committee, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us this morning. If you're just getting to know us, for more than 130 years, Heartland Alliance has welcomed individuals newly arriving in our city. We've supported and empowered people seeking safety, stability, and prosperity. And we've broken down barriers to create greater access to economic opportunity, health and healing, and safety and justice. We do this because we are champions of human rights, and we believe that everyone in society benefits when all people can achieve equity and opportunity. This is our third Standing Together event, a conversation about equity, and I'm thrilled to have all of you here with us today. Now, this year's event may look a little different than before, but rest assured we are going to follow in the spirit of previous years to ensure we are continuing to share information, learn together, and use our collective voices to bring important issues to the forefront. We are incredibly fortunate to be joined by a group of extraordinary women leaders who will be participating in today's conversation. I cannot wait for you to meet them and hear about their work. Before I go any further, though, I want to acknowledge the meaningful support and contributions of our host committee, an outstanding group of individuals who are deeply dedicated to supporting Heartland Alliance's mission. Robin Armour, Inger Burnett Ziegler, Carrie McElwain, Rini Moses, Robin Snyderman, and Ninzudo. To all of you, I encourage you to interact with us this morning by tagging this conversation on social media and share whatever interesting ideas you hear using hashtag Standing Together. For those of you who joined us last year, you know our conversation centered on gender inequity, and we had a great discussion about what could be done about the profound and persistent disparities in poverty and well-being for women and gender minorities. We also highlighted significant data through our annual poverty report, which reflected these disparities. And this year, we plan to lean into data again. Our 2020 report, released just a few weeks ago, focuses on individuals who are impacted by permanent punishments as a result of prior justice system involvement. In Illinois, nearly 3.3 million adults have an arrest or conviction record, and even after their interaction with the legal system ends, they face 1,189 unique laws and barriers that restrict their access to resources and opportunity. These barriers are referred to as permanent punishments. And today's discussion explores the impact on women and families of permanent punishments and how barriers to employment, healthcare, education, and housing contribute to the vicious cycle of poverty and trauma. Joining us are three inspiring Chicago-based women whose courageous efforts to create a more equitable and just society are helping to break down barriers for millions of individuals who've been justice involved. The women we're lucky to have gathered this morning are not just leading and shining within their fields, they're also dedicated to lifting up the voices of the disenfranchised in order to change policies and practices that stand in the way of achieving equity for all women. And as you listen to the conversation, we want you to be inspired to act and engage as we work together to uplift women and families who are persistently and systemically left behind. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Nika Jones Tapia, who was such a powerful panelist last year. We asked her back and are thrilled she's graciously joining us again this time to lead the discussion. Dr. Jones Tapia is an experienced psychologist who is passionate about mental wellness, criminal justice reform, and supporting young people who've experienced trauma. She is Chicago Beyond's first ever leader in residence and is the former executive director of the Cook County Department of Corrections. In her current role, she is working tirelessly to break the cycle of untreated trauma for kids with incarcerated parents, in part by examining the real-life impacts of incarceration so we can rethink policies to improve the lives of incarcerated parents and their children. It is now my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Nika Jones-Tapia, who will get this exciting conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. I'm so happy to be here with these inspiring women. We are honored to have such progressive panelists here today. And as Evelyn mentioned, now more than ever, we are seeing deep disparities among women. But I want to challenge us all here today to not just see the disparities on the news or in reports, but to really see them in our everyday lives. As we have this conversation, we ask that you reflect on how these issues could be impacting the women that you interact with every day, your coworkers, your family, even yourselves. In realizing how close the problem truly is, we then have more opportunities to become a part of the solution. And now to our esteemed panel. Patrice James has spent her career tackling the inequities of the criminal legal system and currently leads as the Director of Community Justice at Shriver Center on Poverty Law. Most recently, she was a founding attorney at Still She Rises Tulsa, where she provided holistic legal representation primarily to low-income women of color, and engaged in community building and advocated for the shifting of the narrative of women involved in the criminal legal system from broken women to broken systems. Welcome, Patrice. Sadie Joseph joined Heartland Alliance's Ready Chicago team in 2017, where she continues to serve as North Lawndale's Ready Chicago lead job coach. In this role, she facilitates cognitive behavioral therapy and supports participants' professional development by helping young men, oftentimes at the highest risk of being involved in gun violence, to build their resumes and learn how to redirect negative thinking. She also trains other job coaches and has done an outstanding job of integrating her own life experiences into her role. As a leader, Sadie draws from the 25 years she spent incarcerated and is truly an example of how an individual with a record can be a pillar of strength, success, and support in communities. Welcome, Patrice and Sadie. Patrice and Sadie, I'm excited to talk with both of you this morning. We have a lot to cover, so how about we just jump right in? Every day, headlines reinforce the many challenges that our Black and Brown communities are facing as a result of our current criminal legal system. And these challenges seem to only be compounded for women of color. And the stakes are startling. For example, the special report entitled Never Fully Free: The Scale and Impact of Permanent Punishments on People with Criminal Records in Illinois found that Black people make up 13.8% of Illinois' adult population, but 28.9% of those who acquired arrest or conviction records, and 34.9% of people who were convicted of crimes, and even more startling, 45.3% of people who were convicted of felonies. Talk about inequities. Patrice, can you share a bit about what you believe to be some of the root causes that are driving these dramatic inequities that we see facing Black women when it comes to the criminal legal system?
Thank you, Nika. That's a great question. I believe some of the root causes for the increase of the number of women incarcerated in the United States and Illinois to be around issues of access to mental health treatment and diagnosis, substance use issues. But I also think it's important that we name and we acknowledge the disinvestment in Black communities, as well as racism and sexism that Black women in particular face. We have spent so much time over the last more than decade looking at incarceration and looking at how it impacts Black men and men in general, but we have not had that same sort of energy and tenacity and really awareness to think about what is happening to Black women, which has allowed the increase of incarceration for women to just spike with little to no attention or even conversation. It's not until the last few years that people have really started to look and pay attention to what's happening. But it's also, I think, important that we think about the impacts of the criminal legal system to the community, Black community as a whole. What it means when our Black men and our Black boys are being incarcerated, when they are leaving our communities, that strain and stress is disproportionately felt and impacted by Black women. If you walked into criminal courtrooms across the country to see who's in the audience, it is Black women. It's our mothers, it's our sisters, it's our aunts, it's our grandmothers. When you look and go to any line to pay bail, who is standing in line? It is our mothers, our grandmothers. Who is mortgaging their houses to get their sons out of prison? It is Black women. So the criminal legal system absolutely has targeted and gone after Black women in ways that we just are now really starting to have the conversation about. But this system goes after us in every single way possible. When you go to visiting rooms of prisons, it is Black women that are there. And that trauma is generational and it is experienced almost at every level. So I am grateful that we are finally having this conversation. I'm grateful for advocates, especially women who have been impacted and justice involved, who have been begging for us to pay attention, us being us policy folks, but who have been begging and have really been saying, what about me? What about us? For years, and we are just now starting to look and pay attention to them. And so I'm grateful for them because they have been consistent. So those are just some of the things that I think are root causes.
Thank you for that, Patrice. I couldn't agree with you more. Definitely due to the disinvestment that we've seen over centuries in the Black community in particular, we are now dealing with some of those consequences in our criminal legal system, and that's on every level. Thank you for sharing that insight. You know, we know that women often end up within the criminal legal system for reasons that are very different from the men. And you talked about some of those: substance use and mental health concerns. And some of them are rooted in crimes of survival. And some of them are related to crimes of survival, I should say. And these permanent punishments may have a uniquely gendered impact on the women, especially Black women, and especially when it comes to life after incarceration. Sadie, I'm really interested to hear your perspectives, given your experience. Can you speak specifically to the barriers that women with records may face when seeking employment and trying to achieve financial stability for themselves as well as their families?
Yes. So when it comes to coming home after being incarcerated, before you even get home, they tell you gain a skill, go to school, get your certifications, and then you get home and you face the challenge of those certifications. Not everybody take those certifications in. So now it's like starting all over again from the beginning. Or you have the skill, but you don't have the certification. You have the certification, but you don't have enough experience in the skill set. And so that's a barrier for women when we come home, as well as the background check. Now you get the job, they give you the chance, they love your work. However, you are fired because of your background. Oh, we don't accept people with this type of background. And so it's heartbreaking to know that you worked hard. I worked hard for my certifications. Women work hard for their certifications. It's not easy being incarcerated and getting those certifications like that and staying focused as well. And then to come home and it's like a slap in the face. You need to go back to school. You need to get this certification. You need to get that certification. Then you need to work and get these skills right here when nobody is willing to take you on. And so for me, I went to North Lawndale Employment Network, U-Turn Permitted, where I got the skills that I needed to work the job that I currently work right now. And what I didn't have as far as the skills goes, Heartland Alliance made sure that I got it. They gave me the training for the 3 curriculums that we facilitate CAD out of, as well as doing professional development. They gave me the training for the National Anger Management Association, which I am proud to say that I am CMS 1, and I want to continue that and go a little further. And so I'm really glad that I was able to get those soft job skills, and that it didn't matter to them what my background is. It didn't matter to them that I was incarcerated. What mattered is, do you want this job and these skills that we offering to get the job done? And for me, it's paying it forward, and I love my job.
And if I could just build on that, one of the most fascinating things I think about the criminal legal system and the prison side of this system is how the system does not prepare people adequately for release. And we know that almost every person that enters prison is going to be released at some time. And I'm struck that when Sadie was released from prison, she still had to go to an agency to get help and to get the soft skills. And my question is, well, what were they doing and providing to Sadie when she was incarcerated? Why aren't we preparing people at a minimum if we are going to incarcerate people? Why aren't we preparing people to leave and actually be able to fully reintegrate in all of the ways that we know is necessary for people to survive? So why are we releasing people who have been in prison and they're going into the shelter system, or they're going into halfway houses? Why are people coming out of prison after spending a decade or longer, and they still have to go somewhere to get the soft skills and the job development? Why are we releasing people and the first thing that they are ordered to do is to go get a mental health treatment or substance use treatment? My question is, what were you doing? What were you providing to people when they were sitting in prison? It seems like such a waste of time and such a misuse of resources. And we should really be questioning if our system is doing what it purports to do. I question that every day. I know the answer is no, but I hope that more people begin to question and realize that we do not have a system of a rehabilitation. We have a system of just strict, cruel punishment.
You are absolutely right. I couldn't agree with both of you more. And I really want to highlight here for employers as well as educational institutions the opportunity that they have to go inside of jails and prisons and to offer some of those job skills training programs, as well as some of those certifications, and using those experiences as the background check. Let's stop this nonsense of doing these formal background checks with people who are more than capable of doing the work better than many of us who are in the community. So thank you both for that. You know, it's incredibly difficult for women to reach financial stability. So only having a record, you know, I'm sure that makes that even harder. And as a society, we have this nonsense of asking people involved in the criminal legal system to rebuild their lives, but we've imposed these impossibly high hurdles and barriers on them for the rest of their lives. And so it's crucial that we work to create equity, not by transforming people, but by transforming systems that have historically harmed so many people before, during, and after incarceration. Sadie, I'd like to ask you, you know, one of the many challenges of the criminal legal system is the impact that it has on families, especially the children of the men and women who are incarcerated. What are some of those challenges that women who are incarcerated face when it comes to trying to raise a family and support them while involved with the system?
Some of the challenges is being able to see your kids first and foremost. I was blessed because my family brought my kids up. It's like they made sure that no matter what, I was seeing my kids and that they were coming. No ifs, ands, buts about it. But not all people who are incarcerated have that leeway. So they got the reunification center bus, and they come out and they bring your kids to them. So something that was heartbreaking to me is we all in the gym, we waiting for our family to come, and then somebody's family don't show on the bus. They didn't make it in time for the bus, or some came up and they didn't make it. And so now all we have is each other to console each other. And then you get back to the unit and you're consoling her. You saying, hey, just call, you never know what happened. Or your child comes to the visiting room and they are just, well, you're not here for me, or they're out there gang banging, or they're doing other things. We had each other to lean on to give advice to give that advice to our kids. So it's crucial. This is why I say it's crucial that when a mother and a father is incarcerated, that they see their kids to deter their kids from mistakes that they may have made or we may have made in the process. You don't want your kids following in your footsteps in a bad way. And so the way to correct that behavior is to actually take them to the person who got the experience. Do you see where I'm at? I don't want to see you here. And so I need for you to be better than me. I need you to dare to be different. I need for you to get educated in the process. I need for you to have more education than what I have. And so that's things that we instilled in our kids. But like you said, well, like the old folks say, it takes a village to raise a kid.
And I think it's also important that we expand upon. So yes, there are women in prison who have families. It's something like, I think the national number, maybe something like 80% of women that are incarcerated are mothers. But I think it's also important that we talk about justice to involve women more globally and broadly, because women that are impacted by the criminal legal system are not just in our prisons. They could be out of prison and on some form of supervision, or they could be on probation, or just having the arrest or the criminal record. I think one thing that we don't think about is the trauma that comes along just from merely having an interaction with a police officer, but then even being arrested, the embarrassment and the shame and the panic that all can stem just from an interaction with the police officer. And where do you go for healing for that? In particular, where do Black women go to be healed? I think the lack of healing and the lack of resources provided to women, that trickles down into the family. Oftentimes, and a lot of times, women are head of households. They are the main caregiver to children. And so what happens to children when our mothers and our matriarchs are constantly being traumatized by either what's physically happening to them or what they're seeing? I think it's also important that we think about surveillance in our communities. And if you are going to apply for WIC, or you're trying to apply for TANF or some type of benefit, or you're trying to go to the local to your local resource center, how are people treated when they are going in? Oftentimes you see police officers at the door. There's often a paternalistic feeling that is put onto mothers, questioning them about how they are parenting, what they are feeding their children. And I think that is compounded for women that have been justice involved. They are constantly under surveillance and under a microscope of someone telling them that the way that they are living or the way that they are parenting their children is incorrect or is wrong. And that is a real problem in Black communities. And I think it's something that we must constantly look at and think about, even when we think about pregnancy and the infant mortality rate and the death and Black women dying at higher rates during childbirth. I mean, one thing that is fascinating to me is that Black women, especially low-income Black women who are not going to their private OBGYN, they're drug tested at higher rates, oftentimes without their consent, and oftentimes results in them losing their children right after delivery. And it's another form of policing of Black women that we must talk about and that we must change and stop, because it is destroying our communities, it is destroying our families. This has gone on long enough.
Thank you both for those insightful comments. You know, it's not lost on me the number of young people who are impacted by parental incarceration. But Patrice, to your point, it's not just those who are impacted by the incarceration of their parents, but the actual arrest too. You know, we know that every year there are more than 10.8 million arrests in this country. And, you know, that makes me think about the impact and the number of youth that are exposed to law enforcement engagement with their parents. And what are we doing to support our young people, the mothers, the fathers, and the families as a whole? Because when we support the families, we're truly supporting the communities. So thank you both. Through the Never Fully Free report and many other resources, we know that prioritizing safe and stable housing for people when they are exiting incarceration prevents homelessness and supports them while transitioning back into communities and provides a foundation to be able to engage in education and employment. But for the millions of people in Illinois with a criminal record, they face 40 laws that can place a barrier between them and housing and living in certain places. Sadie, in your experiences, have the participants that you serve faced housing discrimination due to their records, or have you yourself experienced these barriers that we're talking about?
So yes, I have participants who experience the barrier of having a background and getting a place to stay. We have several participants who are still looking for housing, but due to COVID-19, nobody is taking nobody in, or it's like it's on a pause. But nevertheless, that background and the amount of check stubs that you need for them to see is a barrier. And so now you're looking at, I don't make as much as the next man to try to get housing, but I do need housing. So it's a barrier when it comes to the income, and it's a barrier when it comes to the background. When it comes to re-entering back out in society and housing, if your family members are living in that low income that says that, hey, Section 8 says, no, you can't parole there. We don't take people. You can't have them. We'll put you out if you allow them to parole to your home. And so those are huge barriers that women and men face when it comes to coming home, or the halfway houses that they have for you to go to. They either take certain cases or don't take other cases, and then the bed's supposed to be ready. And I have had friends where they was like, yes, I got into the halfway house, they excited, we celebrating, and then to come to find out the bed is not available. So now they got to do some extra days or a week or two in jail just to wait on that bed to become available for them to come home. So when you say housing and barriers, yes, it's a huge problem.
And it is a huge problem. Access to affordable housing, there is a shortage. We are in crisis mode across the country, but in Illinois and definitely in Chicago. One of the barriers that comes to mind to me at this moment is the barriers that some subsidized housing providers place on just as involved people who are also on electronic monitoring. If you are on electronic monitoring, some housing facilities will not accept you, they will not take you. And I think that that is a tragedy and something that must be changed. We didn't spend much time talking about electronic monitoring, and electronic monitoring, like incarceration of women, has exploded over the last decade. We are using electronic monitoring in our system more and more and more as we are trying to reduce the number of people that are incarcerated. We are increasing the use of electronic monitoring. And I think it's important that we talk about that, because electronic monitoring is not an alternative to incarceration. Electronic monitoring is a form of incarceration. When people are on an electronic monitor, they are oftentimes confined to their home 24/7. So if you are on pretrial electronic monitoring here in Cook County, you are confined to your home, given very little freedom and movement. And this is important because these are people on the pretrial side who have not been convicted of a crime. These are people that are still parenting, they're still trying to work, they're still trying to go through their day-to-day life, and now they can't because they are confined to their home. I met a gentleman once who told a story of because he was not able to leave his home, he lives on the 3rd floor of a building, he had to get his groceries, he had to pull them up on a string, on a cord, from the ground where his family had gone grocery shopping for him. That is the reality for so many people across Chicago who have not even been convicted of a crime. So we really have to shift this narrative and this dichotomy of, well, at least you're not in prison, well, or at least you're not in jail, but we are confining people to their homes. We are in essence creating open air prisons in our communities. I think it's also equally important on the post-conviction side. There are people who come out of the Illinois Department of Corrections who have served decades, who have served 20 years, 10 years, 30 years who are coming out and they are immediately being placed on an ankle monitor. Just imagine coming out of prison thinking, I've paid my debt to society, and now you are being confined to your home on an ankle monitor, where again, you are given very limited movement. So how do you re-enter into society when you are supposed to be confined to your home? How do you rebuild and repair relationships with family members? How do you find a job? How do you go to the various services that the parole officers require people to do when you are confined to with a monitor to your home?
It sounds like we could have a complete segment on electronic monitoring alone and the barriers and obstacles that it presents for people. And Patrice, I'm really glad that you highlighted the fact that electronic monitoring is not an alternative to incarceration, but instead a form of incarceration in and of itself. And we got to this point by talking about housing. And Sadie, I'm glad that you recognized and highlighted for us the housing issues that exist, but also how COVID-19 has also exaggerated those housing barriers and many of the challenges that people leaving correctional institutions face with respect to housing. You know, families and communities are an incredibly vital source of support for people who are incarcerated and justice involved. Like Patrice, you were saying, even those who are on community supervision. And so we have to ensure that we're not just supporting women, but also supporting their families too, before, during, and after the involvement with the legal system. Patrice, I'd like to ask you, you know, and I know these constant and longstanding barriers facing women with records, it has to be incredibly hard on someone's outlook on life, constantly being told no, or that you can't rebuild even after you've completed your sentence. So in your experiences, have you seen other systems have such negative impacts on women?
Yes. The first system that comes to mind is the child welfare system or the foster care system. It is a system that parallels the criminal legal system. What I say is what the criminal legal system is to Black men, the foster system is to Black women. Across the country, Black women are disproportionately impacted. So Black children are disproportionately impacted by the foster system and by the removal of their children for allegations of abuse and neglect. The statistics show and the reality shows that a vast majority of children that enter foster care or mothers and fathers that enter the child welfare system are for allegations of neglect that can be directly tied to issues of poverty. So that could look like inadequate housing or insufficient housing. It could look like not enough food in the cupboards and cabinets. And women are losing their children, families are losing their children to this system. If you walk in any child protection courtroom in Chicago, you will see nothing but Black women. It is something like 70% of the families in the child protection system in Illinois, in Chicago, are Black. This is a system that targets Black mothers in particular, just like the criminal legal system targets Black men and fathers. And it's a system that has escaped scrutiny for decades. This is a system that preys on families, and it's one that is purported to support families and to help families, and it does the exact opposite. We know that if a child is in foster care, they are more likely to enter the juvenile justice system. If you're in the juvenile justice system, you're more likely to enter the adult criminal legal system. And so the question is, how is that helping? How is that supporting? The foster system operates in so many similar ways. If someone calls a report, a caseworker shows up to someone's house. Oftentimes, a police officer can accompany that caseworker. The caseworker comes in and says, I need to look around your house. I want to talk to your child. Sometimes the child is required to take their clothes off to see if there are any bruises on that child. How is that any different than what an interaction with law enforcement looks like? If you're pulled over, the police officer says, give me your license, give me your registration. Oh, I actually want you to step outside of the car. I actually want to search your car. These systems are parallel systems, and they are together preying and destroying Black communities, and we must talk about it. We must do something about it. These systems are single-handedly, in my opinion, destroying Black communities.
Yes, thank you for that, Patrice. You know, as you were talking about both systems, all I could think about was the traumatic experiences that families face in the involvement with both of those systems. And so, you know, that makes me think about the importance of not just mental health support, but community support as well. And Sadie, I think you spoke about it earlier, and the fact that it really takes a village to really raise our children. And that's where supportive community comes in. In order to build that society, we need partnerships on all levels, especially in government, which is why I'm very excited to share that we have a special message from Illinois Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, who I am honored to introduce as Illinois' first Black female Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor Stratton is spearheading several initiatives focused on equity, including the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative to improve the lives of all Illinoisans. Along with Governor Pritzker, Lieutenant Governor Stratton is focused on addressing the social determinants of crime and incarceration, as well as improving equitable deflection and diversion opportunities from the justice system, and improving conditions and addressing the needs of vulnerable populations in correctional facilities, and supporting positive reentry outcomes to reduce recidivism. Please welcome Lieutenant Governor Stratton.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Nanika, for that kind introduction. I also want to thank Patrice, Sadie, and Heartland Alliance for hosting this critical conversation and providing data that will help everyone understand the scope of the problems faced by people impacted by incarceration. Let me tell you a brief story. Several years ago, I served on an assessment team to look at the conditions at Logan Correctional Center, which is the Women's Correctional Center here in Illinois. We conducted what's called the Gender-Informed Practices Assessment with the goal of understanding whether Logan was best meeting the needs of the women who were in residence at that facility. We had an event several months later to reveal our results, which I'm sure you can all imagine were not that great. But there was a woman in the audience, and her name was Maria, who stood up to speak. And she spoke these words, and by the way, I asked for permission to share them. She said, "I was in prison, and then I went to prison, and then I returned to prison." These words struck me, and what they told me and everyone in that room is that sometimes, due to structural racism and generations of disinvestment, there are people in prison who almost equate their communities to feeling like a prison, with trauma on top of trauma, a lack of opportunity, over-policing while at the same time being under-resourced, and a feeling that there's no path to a better life. As a result of our work and Maria's words, I went on to pass the first in the nation Women's Correctional Services Act to ensure that women in Illinois correctional facilities get trauma-informed and gender-responsive programming and services. But what about these women when they return home to their families and their communities? What can we do to ensure that their communities are not just places where people try to survive, but rather are healthy and vibrant and connected communities where people can thrive? One solution stems from our Cannabis Legislation and Tax Act here in Illinois. In fact, our adult use cannabis legislation is the most equity-centric in the nation, thanks to the leadership of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus and community leaders and stakeholders and advocates from all across the state. This legislation provided for the expungement of hundreds of thousands of low-level cannabis records. And these records disproportionately impacted communities of color and caused so much collateral damage, from limiting job opportunities to making it difficult, if not impossible, to have access to affordable and decent housing. The legislation also established the Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program. We call it the R3 program, thankfully. And this program is implemented by my office, and it reinvests 25% of the net tax revenue from the adult use cannabis sales into communities that have been most impacted by the failed war on drugs, communities which often have been over-policed and have suffered from mass incarceration. I am proud to chair this R3 program board, and I'm really excited about the good that this program is going to do. It represents a transformational change in how government responds to crime, violence, and mass incarceration. Now, the R3 program will fund grants in 5 distinct areas: civil legal aid, reentry services, violence prevention, youth development, and economic development. And right now, there's $31.5 million that are available during this application cycle, which is now open with proposals due on July 20th. By the way, we are also going to need about 300 people to help review those applications and help us pick the best programs and organizations who are ready to uplift underserved areas in our state. We want this review process to be rooted in equity, and we're looking for people representing these R3 eligible areas from around the state. To learn more about applying for the R3 grant or becoming a reviewer, please go to r3.illinois.gov. I hope some of you will apply to be a reviewer as well. I want to thank you all for including me in this conversation, and I want to thank you for all that you are doing to pursue justice, equity, and opportunity in our state. What is discussed here today will have a positive impact on so many lives. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nanika.
Thank you all for sharing those fascinating perspectives. The conversations that are occurring now about racial equity, as well as the social justice marches taking place all over the country, reflect a deep frustration and really an outright rejection of status quo systems that hold people back. We are now hearing calls for social justice and police reform in tandem with radical demands to defund the police. It's a time that demands and really requires profound and transformative change. So in that essence, I'd like to ask each of you this question. What are the most transformative initiatives that need to take place to give women with criminal records a chance to lead successful lives? And I really want you to think big and bold and transformative. And so, Patrice, we'll start with you.
The first thing I would say is that we must have automatic expungement for justice-involved people, but in this scenario, women. I think the other thing is we need to ban the box. We need to remove the question from every single application that exists: have you ever been convicted of a crime? The third thing I think that needs to happen is that we need to reevaluate how we treat substance use disorder or substance misuse. I think that it is really important that we get to the point of decriminalizing drug use and drug possession. And I think a start to that is for Illinois to reclassify simple drug possession, so small quantity drug possession. Currently, Illinois classifies that as a felony. Many states across the country, small possession of drugs is a misdemeanor. Oklahoma did this in 2016. It is time for Illinois to catch up with the rest of the country and do this ASAP. When we're talking about drivers of incarceration for women, drug use, drug possession is at the center. If we want to get serious about incarceration for women, we have to reevaluate our drug policies and how we treat people who have substance use disorders.
Sadie, same question. Think big, bold, transformative.
For me, I believe that the job skills and the training that is needed for women who's coming back out in society to be a productive citizen should be given to them. I believe that the funding should be available for them if they need their GEDs, if they need to go back and do some college courses, that it gets done. I also would love to see them just accept us for who we are and don't judge us by our past. Our past is not our future. Our future is our potential. And so I would love for them to just give us that opportunity. If you do nothing else, give us the opportunity to prove to you that you picked the right person to work for you. But to just hold back on somebody because they have a background is wrong. So I would love to see other companies and organizations take a chance on women. Women don't have that many organizations out there that's willing to take that chance on them. So I challenge them to be like Heartland Alliance and North Lawndale Employment Network and take a chance on employing some of us and see the end results. I'm almost positive that they will love it and be glad that they did so.
Yes, thank you. So employer Sadie has issued a challenge to you, and I appreciate that challenge. And I also want to offer my thoughts on this question too, in really thinking about bold and transformative actions to dismantle the system, I think is a requirement. Right now, our criminal legal system, as we've described it, is rooted in punishment. And if we dismantle it, what I would love to see happen is a buildup of one that is rooted in healing. And I think then and only then will we have a more equitable and just system that our country says that it is trying to have. In addition to all of these amazing insights that have been expressed this morning, I want to draw the attention of the audience to a thorough set of recommendations in the Never Fully Free report. A link to that report is going to be sent to everyone, and it's also currently available at heartlandalliance.org. I think we can take away from this conversation this morning that it is past time to remove permanent punishment, to expand opportunity for everyone. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time in sharing your experiences with us. I'd also like to thank Evelyn and the entire Heartland Alliance team for organizing such an incredible discussion. And most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining today's discussion. Please remember that today's program was not meant to solely be a discussion. It was meant to build a relentless desire in your soul to act and to put fire under your feet to do so now. Thank you.